The moment Ambassador Dylan Cox steps off the United Earth Defense Force spaceship Adamant onto Nexus 7, Brunali females start leaking. It's an unprecedented physiological response, triggering chaos throughout the space station's atrium. Viscous, scented fluid gushes from the bodies of nearby Brunali women. Their male counterparts recoil in shock and outrage. Station security, led by the imposing Commander Krell, moves swiftly to contain the situation. "Separate them? Now!" Krell barks, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. Security forces push through the crowd, forcibly pulling affected females away from the human delegation. Dylan watches, stunned, as the scene unfolds. His security team tenses, hands hovering near their weapons. Amidst the commotion, Dylan's gaze locks with a young Brunali female. Her body trembles violently, fluid pouring from her in copious amounts. She's different from the others. A spark of recognition flashes in her eyes. "Ambassador Cox," Commander Krell's voice booms, "return to your ship immediately. This is a potential biohazard situation." Dylan hesitates, his eyes still fixed on the leaking Brunali female. "We came here on a diplomatic mission. Surely we can—" "Now, Ambassador," Krell interrupts, his tone brooking no argument. As Dylan and his team retreat, urgent communications crackle over the station's comm system. "Implement quarantine protocols," a frantic voice orders. "Possible contamination from human contact." Back aboard the Adamant, Dylan's comm unit chirps with an incoming transmission from United Earth Command. His eyes widen as he reads the message. Similar incidents have occurred on multiple Brunali worlds following human contact. Earth scientists hypothesize that human pheromones trigger an extreme mating response in Brunali females, a phenomenon with potentially devastating consequences for Brunali society. The transmission concludes with new orders: remain on station, negotiate continued diplomatic relations, and buy time for Earth scientists to understand and mitigate the issue. On Nexus 7, the young Brunali female, Willa, a junior diplomat, endures invasive medical examinations. Brunali doctors probe and scan, desperate to control the spreading physiological reactions among their female population. Commander Krell paces the station's command center, issuing rapid-fire orders. Full segregation protocols. No Brunali females are to have any contact with humans. Period. Reports flood in from across Brunali space. Males demand the expulsion of all humans from their territories, fearing the loss of their mates to the irresistible human pheromones. Dylan stands at the viewport of the Adamant, staring out at Nexus 7. The enormity of the situation weighs heavily on him. He must preserve the fragile human-Brunali alliance while grappling with his own conflicted feelings about Willa and the unintended consequences of human presence in Brunali space. As he watches, a medical shuttle docks with the station. More leaking Brunali females are ushered aboard, bound for quarantine. Dylan's jaw clenches. The diplomatic mission has become a crisis, with the fate of 2 species hanging in the balance. And it all started with a simple docking procedure. The days following the incident on Nexus 7 were a whirlwind of activity and mounting tension. Dylan found himself confined to the Adamant, poring over reports and strategizing with his team. The station's corridors, once bustling with interspecies interaction, now stood eerily quiet as Brunali authorities implemented strict segregation protocols. On the 5th day, Dylan's comm unit chirped with a priority message from Commander Krell. "Ambassador Cox, your presence is required for an emergency council meeting. 0900 hours, Central Command." Dylan straightened his uniform, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. As he stepped off the Adamant, a phalanx of security officers surrounded him, creating a buffer between the human diplomat and any Brunali females who might be in the vicinity. The council chamber was a study in nearly unleashed hostility. Brunali leaders glared at Dylan as he took his seat, their postures rigid with distrust. Commander Krell's face was a mask of unyielding commitment as he called the meeting to order. "Gentlemen," Dylan began, his voice steady despite the palpable tension, "I propose a collaborative research effort to understand and mitigate the pheromone issue. Earth is prepared to send our top scientists to work alongside your own." A murmur of discontent rippled through the room. One of the Brunali counselors leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. And allow more humans to contaminate our females? Absolutely not. With all due respect, Dylan countered, this issue affects both our species. Working together is our best chance at finding a solution. Hours of heated debate followed. Dylan presented data, offered assurances, and navigated the treacherous waters of interspecies diplomacy. Finally exhausted and wary, the Brunali leadership conceded. We will permit a small team of human scientists, Krell announced, his tone making it clear this was a grudging concession, but they will be under constant surveillance, and at the first sign of trouble, they'll be expelled. Within days, a team led by Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's foremost endocrinologist, arrived on Nexus 7. They set up a state-of-the-art research facility, working tirelessly to unravel the mystery of the human pheromone effect. As the research progressed, a startling pattern emerged. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled with excitement as she reported her findings to Dylan. The reaction isn't uniform across all Brunali females. Some exhibit an extreme response, while others are barely affected at all. This revelation led to a series of controlled experiments. Brunali female volunteers, protected by containment suits, were exposed to carefully measured doses of human pheromones. The research team meticulously recorded every physiological response, slowly piecing together the puzzle. Amidst the scientific breakthrough, Dylan found his thoughts continually drifting to Willa, the young Brunali diplomat who had reacted so strongly to his presence. Using his diplomatic credentials, he arranged a meeting under the guise of a formal briefing. The station's conference room felt charged with an almost electric tension as Willa entered. She wore a containment suit, her features barely visible behind the protective visor. Dylan's heart raced, a mix of anticipation and concern coursing through him. Ambassador Cox, Willa's voice came through the suit's speakers, slightly distorted but unmistakably strained. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. Please call me Dylan, he replied, fighting the urge to move closer. How are you holding up? Willa's laugh was tinged with bitterness. As well as can be expected, given the circumstances, the medical examinations have been invasive. They spoke for hours, delving into the intricacies of their respective cultures and the challenges posed by the current crisis. Despite the physical barrier between them, Dylan felt a growing connection to the young Brunali diplomat. As they talked, the station around them seethed with unrest. A faction of Brunali males, led by a charismatic political figure named Jax, had begun organizing protests against the continued human presence on Nexus 7. Humans out! Protect our females! The chants echoed through the station's corridors, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. Commander Krell's security forces worked overtime, struggling to contain the growing unrest. Barricades went up around the human research facility, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The situation reached a boiling point 3 weeks into the research effort. Dylan was jolted awake by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the station. He rushed to the command center, arriving to find Krell barking orders into a comm unit. What's happening? Dylan demanded. Krell's face was grim. Jax and his followers have breached the research facility. They're destroying equipment and... He paused, his expression darkening further. Several female volunteers have been exposed to uncontrolled levels of human pheromones. Dylan's blood ran cold. Willa? Unknown, Krell replied curtly. We're implementing a station-wide lockdown. Medical teams are en route to the facility. As chaos engulfed Nexus 7, Dylan's comm unit lit up with an incoming transmission. His heart leapt when he saw the sender. Willa. Her message was brief and cryptic. Meet me in Sublevel 3, Maintenance Access 12B. Come alone. I have information that changes everything. Dylan hesitated, weighing the risks, but the urgency in Willa's message compelled him to act. Slipping away from the command center, he made his way through the station's winding corridors, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. When he reached the designated meeting point, he found Willa waiting, her containment suit streaked with fluid. Her eyes, visible through the visor, were wide with a mixture of fear and perseverance. Dylan, she began, her voice trembling. What I'm about to tell you, it goes deeper than anyone realizes. There's a conspiracy within our government. They've known about the effects of human pheromones for years. As Willa spoke, laying out the evidence she'd uncovered, Dylan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The implications were staggering, threatening to upend everything he thought he knew about the mission and the future of human-Brunali relations. In that moment, standing in the dimly lit maintenance corridor, with alarms blaring in the distance, Dylan realized that his role as ambassador had become something far more complex and dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Dylan's mind raced as he processed Willa's revelations. The dimly lit maintenance corridor suddenly felt claustrophobic, the distant alarms a stark reminder of the chaos engulfing Nexus 7. "We need to act fast," he said, his voice low and urgent. "If what you're saying is true, this goes far beyond a simple diplomatic incident." Willa nodded, her eyes glistening behind her visor. "I've risked everything to tell you this, Dylan. We have to expose the truth before it's too late." As they parted ways, Dylan's comm unit buzzed with an incoming message from Dr. Elena Vasquez. "Ambassador, we need to talk. Urgently." Within the hour, Dylan had assembled a small, trusted team in his quarters aboard the Adamant. Dr. Vasquez sat at his desk, her usually neat appearance disheveled from hours of work. Lieutenant Marcus Stevens, a seasoned member of Dylan's security detail, stood by the door, his posture alert. "I've been analyzing the data from our experiments," Dr. Vasquez began, her fingers flying over a datapad. "There's something odd about the Brunali females' reactions. The variability is too precise, too engineered." Dylan leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "I think someone's been tampering with our research," she replied, her voice tight with frustration. "But I need access to more data to confirm my suspicions." Lieutenant Stevens cleared his throat. "Sir, if we're going to conduct an investigation, we need to move carefully. Security's been tightened across the station." Dylan nodded, his mind already formulating a plan. "We'll use my diplomatic credentials to access restricted areas. Elena, you'll come with me under the guise of continued research. Marcus, I need you to run interference and keep an eye on Krell's movements." Over the next few days, Dylan and his team executed their covert operation with precision. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Nexus 7, using maintenance shafts and service tunnels to avoid detection. Dr. Vasquez's expertise allowed them to bypass security protocols on protected terminals, slowly piecing together a trail of classified data. Their breakthrough came on the fourth day. Hidden behind a false wall in a supposedly abandoned section of the station, they discovered a state-of-the-art laboratory. "My God," Dr. Vasquez breathed as they entered the facility. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens displaying complex biological simulations. In the center of the room, a series of stasis pods contained unconscious Brunali females. Dylan approached one of the pods, his heart pounding. The woman inside looked peaceful, unaware of the tubes and sensors attached to her body. A nearby monitor displayed her vital signs alongside a stream of data he couldn't decipher. "Elena, what am I looking at?" he asked, unable to tear his eyes away from the pod. Dr. Vasquez was already at a computer terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. "Long-term exposure studies," she replied, her voice a mix of professional curiosity and moral outrage. "They've been conducting secret experiments for years." As they delved deeper into the classified files, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unfold. The data revealed a series of startling findings. Controlled exposure to human pheromones not only triggered the now familiar physiological response in Brunali females, but also led to increased fertility, enhanced cognitive abilities, and improved overall health. "This is incredible," Dr. Vasquez murmured, scrolling through pages of test results. "The potential medical applications alone are staggering." But as they read on, a darker aspect of the research emerged. Brunali females exposed to human pheromones developed a strong physiological and emotional bond with their human partners, a bond that threatened to disrupt traditional Brunali social structures. "No wonder they've been keeping this under wraps," Lieutenant Stevens said, his voice grim. "This could tear their society apart." Dylan's comm unit chirped, startling them all. It was a message from Willa, requesting another meeting under the guise of diplomatic negotiations. His pulse quickened at the thought of seeing her again, even as he chided himself for the unprofessional reaction. "We need to get this data back to the Adamant," he said, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. "Elena, start the transfer. Marcus, keep an eye on the corridor. I'll go meet with Willa and see what else she knows." The conference room felt charged with tension as Dylan entered. Willa stood by the viewport, her containment suit gleaming under the harsh station lighting. As he approached, he could see her body tense, her breathing becoming rapid even through the suit systems. "Dylan," she said, her voice strained, "I don't have much time. Thax is getting suspicious." For the next hour, Willa provided a crash course in Brunali politics, identifying potential allies and enemies within the government. As she spoke, Dylan could see the toll their proximity was taking on her. Beads of fluid began to form on the inside of her visor, and her hands trembled as she gestured. "Willa," he said softly, fighting the urge to reach out to her. "We should end this meeting. You're not well." She shook her head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. Thax is planning something. He knows about your investigation. You have to—" Her words were cut off by a violent shudder that racked her body. Fluid began to seep from the seams of her containment suit, and she stumbled backward, gasping. "I'm sorry," she managed to choke out before fleeing the room, leaving Dylan standing alone, his heart racing with a mixture of concern and frustration. As he made his way back to the Adamant, alarms began to blare throughout the station. The screen in the corridor flashed with an emergency message. "Warning! Unauthorized access to restricted areas. All personnel report to designated security checkpoints." Dylan quickened his pace, his mind racing. Had they been discovered? Was Thax making his move? As he rounded the corner to the docking bay, he nearly collided with Dr. Vasquez and Lieutenant Stevens. "Ambassador," Stevens said, his voice low and urgent, "we've got a problem. Krell's men are searching the Adamant. They know." Dylan's blood ran cold as he realized the precarious position they were in. With the evidence of the Brunali government's deception in their possession and Thax closing in, they were walking a razor's edge between diplomatic incident and interstellar conflict. As security forces swarmed the corridors around them, Dylan knew they were running out of time. They needed to find a way to expose the truth, neutralize Thax's plans, and somehow salvage the fragile peace between humans and Brunali. And they needed to do it all before Jax and his anti-human faction tore Nexus 7 apart. The alarms continued to wail as Dylan and his team huddled in a maintenance alcove, the future of two species hanging in the balance of their next move. The future of two species hanging in the balance of their next move. Dylan made a split-second decision. "We need to act now," he said, his voice low but firm. "Elena, how quickly can you produce a batch of those pheromone suppressors you've been working on?" Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened. "They're still experimental, but I could have a small batch ready in a few hours." "Why?" "Because we're going to need them," Dylan replied, his mind racing. "I'll test them myself. It's a risk, but it's our best shot at getting to the communication hub undetected." As Dr. Vasquez hurried off to her makeshift lab, Dylan turned to Lieutenant Stevens. "Marcus, I need you to gather any allies we can trust. We'll need backup when we make our move." The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Dr. Vasquez worked tirelessly, her hands steady despite the pressure. When she finally emerged holding a small vial of clear liquid, her face was etched with concern. "It's ready, but Dylan, you need to understand the risks. We haven't had time for proper testing. The side effects could be—" Dylan cut her off, taking the vial. "We don't have a choice." Without hesitation, he downed the contents, grimacing at the bitter taste. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a wave of dizziness washed over him, forcing him to grip the edge of a nearby console for support. As the sensation passed, he straightened, nodding to his team. "Let's move." They had barely stepped into the corridor when the station rocked with a violent explosion. Alarms blared as the intercom crackled to life. "Alert! Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel to battle stations." "Jax," Dylan muttered, his jaw clenching. "He's made his move." As they navigated the chaos-filled corridors of Nexus 7, the scale of Jax's attack became clear. Smoke billowed from breached bulkheads, and the sounds of shouting and weapons fire echoed through the station. They rounded a corner to find a group of Brunali females huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Dylan approached cautiously, bracing himself for the usual reaction. To his amazement, the women remained calm, their bodies showing no sign of the typical physiological response to his presence. "It works," he breathed, a mix of relief and excitement washing over him. A nearby explosion jolted them back to reality. "We need to keep moving," Lieutenant Stevens urged, ushering the group towards a safer area. As they neared the central communication hub, Dylan's comm unit buzzed. Willa's voice came through, breathless and urgent. "Dylan, I'm on my way to you. I have the access codes for the comm system. We can expose everything." "Willa, it's too dangerous," Dylan protested, but she had already cut the connection. They arrived at the hub's entrance to find it guarded by a squad of Jax's followers. Before Dylan could formulate a plan, a blur of motion caught his eye. Willa appeared from a side passage, her containment suit discarded, wielding a makeshift weapon. "Duck!" she yelled, hurling a stun grenade into the group of guards. In the ensuing chaos, Dylan and Willa fought side by side, their movements synchronized as if they'd trained together for years. As the last guard fell, they locked eyes, a moment of understanding passing between them. "The suppressors," Willa said, her breathing heavy. "They work?" Dylan nodded, reaching out to squeeze her hand. The simple touch, impossible just days ago, spoke volumes. Their moment was shattered by a cold voice behind them. "I'm afraid I can't allow you to go any further." They turned to see High Counselor Thax, flanked by armed guards, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. "It's over, Thax," Dylan said, stepping forward. "We know everything about the secret research, the long-term studies. You can't keep this hidden any longer." Thax's composure cracked, his voice rising. "You don't understand. The pheromone compatibility, it could revolutionize our entire society, but the changes would be too destabilizing. Our way of life." His rant was cut short as Dr. Vasquez and Lieutenant Stevens arrived with a group of moderate Brunali, their weapons trained on Thax and his men. In the moment of distraction, Dylan and Willa slipped into the communication hub. Their fingers flew over the controls, uploading the classified data and bypassing security protocols with Willa's access codes. "It's done," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper as she activated the station-wide broadcast. As the truth spread through Nexus 7, the sounds of conflict outside began to die down. Reports flooded in of Jax's followers standing down, confused and angry at the manipulation they'd endured. In the sudden quiet, Dylan's comm unit chimed with an incoming transmission from United Earth Command. As he listened, his face grew grave. "What is it?" Willa asked, concern etching her features. Dylan looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "This is bigger than we thought. The pheromone situation. It's not just Nexus 7. It's happening on other Brunali worlds too." The weight of this revelation settled over them. What had started as a diplomatic crisis on a single station had now become a galaxy-spanning issue that threatened to reshape the relationship between humans and Brunali forever. As they stood there, the enormity of the challenge ahead looming over them, Dylan felt a fierce commitment rise within him. Whatever came next, he knew that with Willa by his side, in their growing circle of allies, they had a fighting chance to forge a new future for both their peoples. The communication hub's door slid open, revealing Commander Krell. His usual stoic expression was replaced by one of grim tenacity. "Ambassador Cox, we need to talk. The situation on Nexus 7 is stabilizing, but we're receiving reports of unrest from other Brunali outposts. The High Council is demanding answers." Dylan nodded, squaring his shoulders. The real work was just beginning. Dylan took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. "Understood, Commander. Let's move this conversation to a secure location," Dylan said, gesturing for Krell and Willa to follow him. As they made their way through the chaotic corridors of Nexus 7, Dylan's comm unit buzzed again. This time, it was Admiral Hernandez from United Earth Command. "Ambassador Cox, we're ordering your immediate return to Earth for an emergency summit." The Admiral's voice crackled through the device. "The situation has escalated beyond a local incident. We need you here to brief the Security Council." Dylan's mind raced, weighing the implications of leaving Nexus 7 at such a critical juncture. He glanced at Willa, her face etched with concern, and made a split-second decision. Admiral, with all due respect, I believe my presence here is crucial for maintaining stability, Dylan argued, his voice firm. The Brunali are in turmoil, and we've just established a fragile trust. Leaving now could jeopardize everything we've accomplished. There was a long pause before the Admiral responded. You have 48 hours, Ambassador. After that, I expect you on the first shuttle back to Earth. As Dylan ended the call, Dr. Vasquez approached, her face pale with exhaustion. I've been working on producing more suppressors, but there's a problem, she said, her voice tight with worry. The effectiveness seems to diminish over time. We'll need to administer doses more frequently to maintain the effect. Dylan nodded grimly, filing away this new complication. Keep working on it, Elena. We'll need every advantage we can get. Willa, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. I have a proposal, she said, her eyes bright with willpower. We should establish a joint human Brunali colony on a neutral planet. Volunteers from both species could coexist, allowing us to study the long-term effects of pheromone exposure in a controlled environment. The idea sparked a flurry of discussion among the group. Commander Krell, initially skeptical, began to see the potential benefits. It could provide valuable data while demonstrating our commitment to cooperation, he mused. As they debated the logistics of Willa's proposal, a security officer approached, his face grim. Ambassador, we've extracted some critical information from High Counselor Thax during interrogation, he reported. There's a secret Brunali research facility on a remote moon. They've been conducting advanced pheromone studies there. Dylan's pulse quickened at the news. That data could be crucial in developing a permanent solution, he said, his mind already racing with possibilities. Commander Krell stepped forward, his posture straightening. I volunteer to lead an expedition to this facility, he said, his voice resolute. It's time I made amends for the security failures on Nexus 7. Dylan nodded, appreciating Krell's initiative. I'm coming with you, he declared. This mission is too important to delegate. Willa moved to Dylan's side, her eyes meeting his. I'm going too, she said firmly. My knowledge of Brunali systems could be invaluable. As they began to plan the expedition, alarms blared through the station once again. A frantic voice came over the intercom. Alert! Prisoner escape in progress! Jax has broken free and is gathering his followers. Dylan cursed under his breath. We need to move fast, he said, turning to his team. Prepare for immediate departure. We can't let Jax interfere with our mission. Dr. Vasquez approached, holding a small case. I've developed a new prototype suppressor, she explained quickly. It offers extended effectiveness and fewer side effects, but I could only produce a limited quantity. Dylan took the case, knowing the risks involved in using an experimental treatment. It'll have to do, he said grimly. As they boarded the specially outfitted Brunali research vessel, reports flooded in of Jax's forces mobilizing across the station. The expedition team worked quickly, stowing equipment and preparing for launch. Standing on the bridge, Dylan looked out at the chaos engulfing Nexus 7. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on his shoulders. Two civilizations teetered on the brink of conflict, and the key to peace lay hidden on a distant moon. All systems ready, the Brunali pilot announced. Awaiting your command, Ambassador. Dylan took a deep breath, his perseverance hardening. Take us out, he ordered. Maximum speed to the coordinates of the secret facility. As the ship detached from Nexus 7's docking clamps, Dylan felt the familiar lurch of acceleration. They were racing against time, with Jax's forces in pursuit and the threat of interstellar war looming on the horizon. Beside him, Willa stood tall, her presence a comfort in the face of uncertainty. Together they watched as Nexus 7 receded into the distance, the vastness of space stretching out before them. Their journey to the heart of the Brunali secrets had begun, and with it, the chance to forge a new future for both their peoples. As Nexus 7 faded into the distance, Dylan turned his attention to the mission ahead. The prototype suppressors Dr. Vasquez had provided were their lifeline, but the stakes were higher than ever. ETA to the secret facility? Dylan asked the Brunali pilot. Approximately 6 hours, Ambassador, she replied, her fingers dancing across the control panel. Dylan nodded, then addressed the team gathered on the bridge. We need to be prepared for anything. Willa, what can you tell us about the security measures we might encounter? Willa stepped forward, her eyes focused on the holographic display of their destination. Brunali research facilities are typically fortified with biometric scanners and energy shields. However, given the sensitive nature of this particular site, we should expect additional countermeasures. Commander Krell, his face set in dogged perseverance, added, we should also be ready for potential automated defense systems. I brought specialized equipment to deal with such threats. As the team discussed strategy, Dylan felt a familiar wave of dizziness wash over him. He gripped the edge of a nearby console, closing his eyes briefly to steady himself. Willa noticed his discomfort and moved closer, concern etched on her face. Are you all right? Dylan managed a weak smile. The suppressors, they seemed to be wearing off faster than expected. Dr. Vasquez approached, her medical scanner already in hand. I was afraid of this, she muttered, reviewing the data. The new formula is more potent, but it metabolizes quicker. We'll need to administer another dose soon. The journey to the moon seemed to stretch on endlessly. As they approached their destination, tension filled the air. The secret facility came into view, a sprawling complex of low, dark structures nestled in a crater. No signs of activity, the pilot reported as they began their descent. The landing was smooth, but as soon as the hatch opened, they knew something was wrong. The air was still, devoid of the usual bustle of a working research station. It's been abandoned, Willa whispered, her voice tight with apprehension. The team moved cautiously, weapons at the ready. The facility's entrance loomed before them, its doors left slightly ajar in what appeared to be a hasty evacuation. Inside, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Workstations were cleared, data drives removed, and equipment packed away. Whatever had happened here, it had been planned. Spread out, Dylan ordered. We need to find any information they might have left behind. As they explored deeper into the complex, they encountered increasingly sophisticated security measures. Laser grids crisscrossed corridors, and holographic interfaces demanded complex access codes. Dr. Vasquez worked tirelessly, her fingers flying over her portable hacking device. These systems, they're unlike anything I've seen before, she muttered, brow furrowed in concentration. Meanwhile, Dylan and Willa pushed further into the heart of the facility. They came upon a sealed door, its control panel pulsing with an eerie blue light. This is it, Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. The main research lab. As Dr. Vasquez worked to bypass the door's security, Dylan felt another wave of dizziness. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall. Willa moved to steady him, but as soon as their skin made contact, she gasped and pulled away. Dylan, she said, her eyes wide, your pheromones. I can feel them again. Before they could address this new complication, the door slid open with a soft hiss. What they saw inside made them forget everything else. The laboratory was filled with rows of stasis pods, each containing a Brunali female. Holographic displays above each pod showed vital signs and data readouts. By the stars, Willa breathed, her face a mask of shock and horror. They were experimenting on their own people. As they moved through the lab, gathering data and samples, alarms suddenly blared to life. Commander Krell's voice crackled over their comms. Multiple ships approaching. It's Jax. He's found us. The team scrambled to finish their work, downloading every bit of data they could access. As they prepared to evacuate, Dylan's eyes fell on the stasis pods. We can't leave them, he said, gesturing to the unconscious Brunali. Willa nodded, already moving to the pod controls. Help me wake them up. We'll need to carry those too weak to walk. As they worked to free the test subjects, the facility shook with the impact of weapons fire. Jax's forces had begun their assault. We're cut off from the main hangar. Krell's voice came through again, tinged with urgency. Get to the emergency shuttle bay on level 3. With the last of the Brunali test subjects revived, the team made their way through the crumbling facility. Dylan and Willa supported those too weak to move on their own, the physical contact between them growing more charged with each passing moment. They reached the shuttle bay just as another explosion rocked the complex. As they boarded the small craft, Dylan turned to see Jax and his men storming into the hangar, weapons raised. "Go!" Dylan shouted to the pilot. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and they shot out of the bay, narrowly avoiding a barrage of weapons fire. As they broke atmosphere, the true scale of their predicament became clear. Jax's ships formed a blockade around the moon, their weapons trained on the fleeing shuttle. "We'll never make it through," the pilot said, her voice tight with fear. Dylan looked at Willa, seeing his own desperation mirrored in her eyes. In that moment, an idea formed. Dangerous, perhaps even reckless, but possibly their only chance. "The pheromone samples," he said, turning to Dr. Vasquez. "Can we weaponize them?" The doctor's eyes widened as she grasped his plan. "Theoretically, yes, but the concentration required—" "Do it," Dylan ordered. As Dr. Vasquez worked to prepare the samples, Dylan took control of the shuttle's communications. He hailed Jax's flagship, buying them precious time with empty negotiations. "Now," Dr. Vasquez called out, her device primed and ready. With a silent prayer, Dylan activated the shuttle's life support purge, sending a concentrated burst of human pheromones toward Jax's ships. For a moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. Jax's ships began to move erratically, their formations breaking apart as the unprepared Brunali males struggled against the sudden onslaught of pheromones. In the confusion, the shuttle slipped past the blockade, setting a course for Nexus 7. As the adrenaline of their escape faded, the weight of what they'd discovered settled over the team. The data they'd retrieved held the key to understanding the long-term effects of human pheromones on Brunali biology, effects that could change everything. Dylan looked at Willa, feeling the pull between them stronger than ever. The suppressors had failed completely now, leaving them both raw and exposed to each other's presence. As Nexus 7 grew larger in the view screen, they knew that the real challenges, both personal and political, were only just beginning. As Nexus 7 grew larger in the view screen, they knew that the real challenges, both personal and political, were only just starting. The shuttle docked with a soft thud, and the team disembarked into a station in turmoil. Alarms blared and panicked voices echoed through the corridors. Medical personnel rushed past, pushing hover gurneys loaded with Brunali females in various states of distress. Dylan steadied himself against the wall, his head swimming with the intoxicating scent of Willa beside him. "We need to get to the command center," he said, forcing himself to focus. As they made their way through the chaos, the full extent of the crisis became apparent. Brunali females lined the corridors, their bodies shaking with uncontrollable tremors as they reached out towards any passing humans. Security officers struggled to maintain order, their faces strained with the effort of resisting the pheromone-induced attraction. In the command center, they found Dr. Vasquez hunched over a terminal, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She looked up as they entered, her expression a mix of relief and frustration. "The suppressors, they're barely making a dent," she said, gesturing to the screens displaying the medical data. "We're seeing physiological changes in the Brunali females that we never anticipated." Commander Krell strode in, his uniform disheveled. "It's not just here," he reported grimly. "We're getting reports from across Brunali space. Riots, mass evacuations. Their entire society is fracturing." Dylan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We need to synthesize a more effective suppressor," he said, turning to Dr. Vasquez. "Can you use the data we retrieved from the facility?" Before she could answer, a violent tremor shook the station. Warning klaxons screamed to life as Krell rushed to the security feeds. "We're under attack," he shouted. "Multiple Brunali ships. It's Jax!" The command center erupted into frenzied activity. Dylan and Willa exchanged a glance, their unspoken connection growing stronger by the moment. "We need to evacuate the research data," Dylan said, already moving toward the door. "If Jax gets his hands on it—" Willa nodded, falling into step beside him. As they raced through the corridors, explosions rocked the station. They reached the research lab just as a group of Jax's followers breached the security doors. In the ensuing firefight, a stray blast struck a containment unit. It ruptured with a hiss, releasing a concentrated cloud of human pheromones. Willa stumbled, her eyes wide as she inhaled the potent mixture. "Willa," Dylan called out, reaching for her. The moment their skin made contact, he felt an electric surge pass between them. Willa's body convulsed, her pupils dilating rapidly. "Dylan," she gasped, her voice strained. "Something's happening to me." He scooped her into his arms, fighting against the overwhelming urge to give in to the attraction between them. With Jax's forces closing in, Dylan made a split-second decision. "Krell!" he shouted into his comm. "We need to abort. Willa's been exposed to a massive dose of pheromones. She needs immediate medical attention." "Understood," Krell's voice crackled back. "I'll cover your escape. Get to the emergency shuttle bay on level 6. As Dylan carried Willa through the chaos of the embattled station, he could feel her body changing in his arms. Her skin burned with fever, and her breathing became increasingly labored. They reached the shuttle bay just as another explosion tore through the station. Dylan strapped Willa into the co-pilot's seat, her semi-conscious form slumping against the restraints. As he fired up the engines, a transmission from United Earth Command flashed across the screen. Dylan's eyes widened as he scanned the urgent message. The pheromone crisis had spread beyond the Brunali, affecting multiple alien species across known space. The implications were staggering, but Dylan forced himself to focus on the immediate crisis. With Willa's condition deteriorating rapidly beside him, he punched in the coordinates for the nearest human outpost. As the shuttle broke free from Nexus 7's docking clamps, Dylan cast one last look at the station. Through the view screen, he saw Commander Krell's forces engaged in a fierce battle with Jax's followers. The commander's sacrifice would give them the precious time they needed to escape. The shuttle accelerated away from the embattled station, streaking into the void of space. Dylan reached out, grasping Willa's hand as her body shuddered with another wave of transformation. "Hold on, Willa," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just hold on." As they raced towards the human outpost and the promise of advanced medical care, Dylan's mind reeled with the enormity of their situation. The fate of not just Willa, but potentially the entire galaxy hung in the balance. And at the center of it all was the inexplicable, uncontrollable power of human pheromones. The shuttle's engines hummed as they pushed deeper into space, leaving behind the chaos of Nexus 7. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim hope of salvation. Dylan tightened his grip on the controls, his mind focused. Whatever challenges awaited them, he knew one thing for certain: he and Willa would face them together. Together, whatever lay ahead. As the shuttle hurtled through space, Dylan's attention was suddenly drawn to a series of flashing red indicators on the control panel. The ship shuddered violently, causing Willa to moan in pain. "Warning, critical system failures detected," the ship's AI announced in a calm voice that belied the gravity of the situation. Dylan's hands flew over the controls, desperately trying to stabilize the craft. Through the view screen, he could see the human outpost growing larger, a beacon of hope in the vast emptiness of space. But between them and safety lay a treacherous field of debris, remnants of some long-forgotten battle. "Hold on, Willa," Dylan muttered, more to himself than his semi-conscious companion. He glanced at her, noting the sheen of sweat on her skin and the rapid, shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her body was changing before his eyes, the massive dose of pheromones wreaking havoc on her Brunali physiology. With the ship's biotech components failing, Dylan was forced to switch to manual controls. He gripped the yoke tightly, his knuckles tightening with tension as he expertly maneuvered through the debris field. A piece of twisted metal scraped along the hull, sending a teeth-rattling vibration through the cabin. "Outpost control to incoming shuttle," a voice crackled over the comm. "We're tracking multiple system failures. Can you maintain your approach vector?" "Negative," Dylan responded, his voice strained as he yanked the controls to avoid a spinning chunk of what looked like an old satellite. "I've lost most of my nav systems. I'm coming in hot and manual." "Understood. We're clearing the emergency landing pad now." "Good luck, pilot." The outpost loomed large in the view screen, its massive docking bays and habitat modules a welcome sight. but Dylan's target was much smaller. A narrow strip of reinforced alloy jutting out from the side of the station, designed for precisely this type of emergency landing. As they entered the outpost's atmosphere, the shuttle began to shake violently. Warning klaxons blared as the heat shields struggled to compensate for their uncontrolled descent. Dylan's world narrowed to the rapidly approaching landing pad and the readouts on his control panel. With a final desperate adjustment, Dylan brought the shuttle down hard on the emergency pad. The impact sent shockwaves through the ship, and for a moment, Dylan feared the entire craft might break apart. But the landing gear held, and the shuttle skidded to a stop mere meters from the edge of the pad. As soon as the ship came to rest, the outpost's emergency response team sprang into action. Medical personnel in crisp white uniforms rushed toward the shuttle, hover gurneys floating beside them. Dylan's hands shook as he released his harness. He turned to Willa, gently unbuckling her restraints. "We made it," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her skin burned hot to the touch, and her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with pain. The shuttle's hatch hissed open, and a rush of cool, filtered air filled the cabin. Medical technicians swarmed in, their movements efficient and practiced. "Status report," one of them demanded, running a scanner over Willa's trembling form. "Massive pheromone exposure," Dylan explained quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's undergone rapid physiological changes. Her body temperature is dangerously high, and she's been slipping in and out of consciousness." The medical team nodded, transferring Willa to a hover gurney with practiced ease. "We'll take her to the advanced treatment facility," a doctor assured Dylan. "Dr. Vasquez is already there with the research data. We'll do everything we can." As they whisked Willa away, another medic approached Dylan, scanner in hand. "Sir, you've sustained injuries as well. We need to get you to the medical bay for treatment." Dylan shook his head, already moving to follow Willa's gurney. "I'm fine. I need to stay with her." The medic opened his mouth to argue, but a sudden explosion rocked the outpost, nearly knocking them both off their feet. Alarms began to blare throughout the station. "We're under attack!" a voice shouted over the station-wide comm system. "All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill." Dylan's heart raced as he looked out the nearest viewport. In the distance, he could see flashes of weapons fire as United Earth defense ships engaged an incoming fleet. A security officer ran up to Dylan, her face grim. "Sir, we've identified the attackers. It's a coalition of alien forces. They're trying to contain the spread of human pheromone influence." Dylan's mind raced, processing this new threat even as his concern for Willa threatened to overwhelm him. He made a split-second decision. "Get me to the command center," he ordered. "I'll coordinate the ground defenses, and I need a direct link to the medical bay. I want updates on Willa's condition every 5 minutes." As Dylan hurried towards the command center, the station shook with another impact. Through it all, his thoughts remained fixed on Willa, fighting for her life in the medical bay. Whatever happened next, he knew their fates were inexorably linked, not just to each other, but to the future of human-alien relations throughout the galaxy.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.